This is the ultimate Paris exploration guide. During the winter and spring of 2023, I had the incredible opportunity to live and study in Paris, France. In that time, I was able to explore a myriad of the city's seemingly countless museums, attractions, parks, and more. In this video, I am going to attempt to provide a fairly thorough overview of what the city has to offer the visitor by going through neighborhood by neighborhood. There will be more of a focus on museums, historic monuments, and art installations as opposed to food and shopping, but there's going to be a bit of everything mixed in. Now there is going to be a lot covered in this video, though believe it or not, this is not an all-encompassing survey. The city of Paris is separated into 20 arrondissements. I am not going to exactly follow those district lines, and instead will present areas based on historical neighborhoods and connected geographies that go beyond arrondissement boundaries. We'll go further afield too. I was able to reach every place in this video using public transportation. You can purchase a monthly RATP Navigo pass for all 5 zones and use unlimited transport throughout the month. There are also some Navigo pass options that can work whether you're here for a couple weeks or just a few days. But the point being, everything featured here is quite accessible. Usually it is easy to get around, unless there's a transport strike, or a garbage workers strike, or a tractor blockade, but c'est la vie. So if you are planning a visit to Paris sometime, especially with the 2024 Olympic Games happening there, the goal of this video is to present and break down a wide variety of possible places you could go visit, from all the classic staples to some rather off the beaten path sites and everything in between. Anyways, allez-y! Let's get right into it. We will start out where the city of Paris began, the Île-de-la-Cité, which is an island in the middle of the river Seine. The island has thousands of years of history to explore, as the Parisi tribe built the first settlement on the island in the 3rd century BC. The Romans arrived in 52 BC and founded the town of Lutetia in its place. Some remains of the ancient Gallo-Roman village can be visited in the Crypte Archéologique. The ruins are located underneath the parvis of one of Paris's most important landmarks, Notre Dame Cathedral. The towering Gothic masterpiece was built over centuries starting in the 12th century. It has been a religious, political, and cultural staple of the city and the nation of France ever since. Sadly, in 2019, a devastating fire broke out, destroying the roof and the 19th century spire. Thankfully, most of the structure did survive. So the cathedral was being reconstructed during my time in Paris. Clearly, it is quite the project. A new replica spire has since been installed. The cathedral is expected to reopen to visitors on the 8th of December 2024. The Palais de la Cité dominated the other end of the Île-de-la-Cité starting in the Capetian era, and many important remnants of the palace survive, merged by the now former Palais de Justice. The oldest surviving section is the Conciergerie, built as a royal palace in the 14th century with the city's oldest clock. This was where over 4,000 prisoners were held before their beheadings during the French Revolution. Visitors can tour a museum in the prison, and the shrine in the location of Marie Antoinette's cell. But the crown jewel of the old palace is Sainte-Chapelle, which was constructed under King Louis IX to house his new relics, including the purported Crown of Thorns of Christ, which costs way more to purchase than the construction of this architectural marvel. While the Crown of Thorns is no longer displayed here, it's usually in the treasury at Notre Dame. The stained glass kaleidoscope in the chapel is a must-see. This is the Place Dauphine, which is a rare surviving 17th century square. At the tip of the island, make sure to visit the Square du Vert Galant, which was where the crusader Jacques de Molay was burned at the stake. The oldest bridge in Paris, coincidentally named the Pont Neuf or New Bridge, connects the island with the left and right banks. It was constructed throughout the late 1500s. There is also an equestrian statue of King Henri IV. Going back the other way toward Notre Dame, there's the historic Marché aux Fleurs flower market, which also sells birds on Sundays. And at the back end of the island there is a Holocaust memorial, the Memorial des Martyrs de la Déportation. There is an even smaller island directly behind the Île-de-la-Cité called the Île Saint-Louis. While it is charming, there is not a whole lot for a visitor to see. It is primarily residential. Many famous Parisians such as Marie Curie lived on the island. There is also a Baroque church called Saint-Louis-en-l'Île. It is important to note that the city of Paris was revitalized on a huge scale during the mid-19th century under Baron Haussmann's renovation, creating much of the modern layout and appearance of Paris that we know today, which occurred over a period of about 20 years from the late 1850s to 1870. Every area that was part of the city during the Second Empire was to a more or less degree transformed by the renovation, including the Île-de-la-Cité, as several large bureaucratic buildings were built in the place of over 20,000 old structures razed during the renovation. One of the most authentically preserved pre-Haussmann areas of Paris is known as Le Marais, on the rive droite or right bank of the Seine just across from the islands. The former marshland is home to a wide array of hôtels particuliers, which are former mansions with large courtyards. These were popular among the wealthy during the 16th and 17th centuries. Many of these fascinating mansions have been converted into museums. For example, there's the Musée Cognac-Jay, which displays the 18th century art collection of a department store magnate's. The highlight of Le Marais, in my opinion, is the Musée Carnavalet, the museum of the history of the city of Paris, which is located in two adjoined hôtels particuliers. The Carnavalet is massive and most certainly the best city history museum I've ever been to. I had to visit 3 separate days to get through it all. There are some magnificent restored and recreated rooms, as well as some mind-blowing artifacts like Voltaire's armchair. If you want to learn more about Paris history, the Carnavalet is the place you want to visit. One of the most historic and beautiful locations in Paris is the Place des Vosges, a wonderfully symmetrical square which was at the center of the palace of King Henri IV. Having been built in the early 17th century, this is the oldest planned square in Paris. Also, Victor Hugo lived in an apartment at the Place des Vosges, which you can visit. It is rather eccentric. The Bastille prison that was stormed in 1789 was located in Le Marais. It was where the July column stands today. That is actually a memorial to the Revolution of 1830, not the French Revolution. While the Bastille itself is long gone, there is a little-known relocated fragment of the structure nearby. Also, the controversial Opéra National de Paris Bastille is located at the site. There are several interesting churches in Le Marais, such as Saint Paul Saint-Louis, a Jesuit church with a Delacroix painting, as well as Saint-Gervais-Saint-Protais, which is adorned by the oldest classical facade in the city. That church is located behind the Hôtel de Ville, the magnificent City Hall of Paris. The present edifice is a recreation of the original after it was destroyed during the Commune in 1871. The city occasionally puts on exhibitions inside. They actually had a street art display which was interesting. Whenever you're walking around anywhere in Paris, keep an eye out for these Space Invaders. There are thousands of these pixel art Space Invaders located on buildings and sometimes even historic monuments. I found that they were most ubiquitous around Le Marais. There are many other forms of pixel art as well as street art in general abound. Another site worth visiting is the Memorial de la Shoah, a Holocaust memorial and museum with an eternal flame burning at the tomb of an unknown Jewish victim. As mentioned, the old mansions around Le Marais are home to a variety of museums, such as the Musée d'Art et d'Histoire de Judaïsme, a Jewish history museum. There's the Musée de la Chasse et de la Nature, a fascinating old-school hunting museum with all sorts of taxidermy. If you're looking for something a little more off the beaten path, this is a good spot. Another one of my favorites is the Musée Picasso. The largest collection of Pablo Picasso works in the world is housed inside the grand mansion of a 17th century salt tax collector. There are great pieces covering every era of Picasso's career. For more Revolution-era history, there is a quiet square where the Temple once stood. That was where Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were initially held during their arrest. And just a couple blocks away is the Marché de l'Enfant Rouge, the oldest food market in Paris. The Musée des Arts et Métiers is epic. It's a long-running technology museum located inside of a former abbey. Turns out that makes for a surprisingly great setting to explore the history of inventions and technology in France. There are some cool and expansive exhibits, covering everything from cars to automatons. Seriously, it's one of the best antique automaton collections I've ever seen. Beaubourg joins with Les Halles to form an interesting and significantly revitalized area of the old city. Beaubourg is dominated by the Centre Pompidou, the largest modern art museum in Europe. The inside-out color-coded structure is most certainly out of place in this part of the city. It was definitely controversial back when it opened in the 1970s. Inside there are many important and intriguing works of 20th century and 21st century artwork, featuring significant artists like Robert Delaunay and Vasily Kandinsky. They also have Joan Mirau's Blue Triptych, André Breton's Preserved Study, and even a unique work of Jackson Pollock. At the end of 2025, the Centre Pompidou will be closing for a half-decade-long renovation, so visit while you can. Visitors can also see the relocated studio of the abstract sculptor Constantin Brunkush on the piazza in front of the Centre Pompidou. For around 800 years, the area known as Les Halles was the fruit, vegetable, and meat market of Paris. However, the magnificent old merchant stalls were suddenly torn down in 1971, and it was replaced by a modern mall which was hated, so it got torn down in 2011. Now there is a new Forum des Halles which opened in 2016. It is a colossal underground shopping center with cinemas and more. Les Halles is also one of the busiest metro stops in Paris. When redeveloping Les Halles, they thankfully spared Saint-Eustache, one of the largest and most beautiful Gothic churches in Paris. It is absolutely worth stopping in, especially to see the stained glass window that was sponsored by the Sausage Makers Guild. Another important historic structure at Les Halles is the Bourse du Commerce, the old grain exchange. It was recently converted to display the Pinot collection, a great contemporary art venue. It's one of the newest museums in Paris. If you've ever seen Ratatouille, you may recognize this window display. The dead rat window is real. Despite all the large-scale modern developments of the past half-century, there are still many really old structures that survive in this area, such as the house of the alchemist Nicolas Flamel from 1407. It is actually the oldest surviving house in Paris. There's also the Église Saint-Marie, and the Tour Jean Saint-Peur, a tower from the 15th century residence of the Dukes of Burgundy which is open on a limited schedule. The Fontaine des Innocents is the last surviving Renaissance fountain in the city. The Place du Châtelet just across the Seine from the Conciergerie boasts an Egyptian-inspired fountain commemorating Napoleon's victories. There's also a lonesome Gothic tower called the Tour Saint-Jacques. The rest of the church got destroyed during the Revolution. Next, we will go north of the Seine and Les Halles to the iconic Grand Boulevard at the Opera Quarter. Les Grands Boulevards are some of the best examples in the city of Haussmannian design, with the beautiful, wide, tree-lined avenues and grand buildings housing many cafes and stores. The centerpiece of this district is the magnificent Palais Garnier, the ornate Beaux-Arts opera house of Paris built in the late 19th century. This is one of the most beautiful buildings in the city. It is absolutely worth seeing the Grand Foyer and other chambers. Just be aware that the auditorium itself is often closed. It was when I visited. Generally, they do not actually have operas here anymore, but they still put on ballets. There are two historically significant and colossal department stores behind the Palais Garnier. First off, the world-renowned Galeries Lafayette, with its lofty stained glass rotunda. They also have a free observation deck at the top. There is also Le Printemps, which opened in 1865. There are other worthwhile tourist attractions around this quarter, my favorite being Musée Grévin, a wax museum that opened in 1882. So it is one of the oldest wax museums in the world and possibly the most elaborate. The Hard Rock Cafe of Paris is also on the Grand Boulevard. It's like a mini rock and roll museum. This area is lined by the famed passages. About 25 of these early 19th century covered shopping arcades survive after Haussmann had most of them demolished. They are really cool to explore, but some are much more interesting and occupied than others. The Passage des Panoramas and Passage Jouffroy near the Musée Grévin are some of the best, as well as the Galerie Vivien just behind the Palais Royal. The oldest one, the Passage de Caire, seems largely abandoned today, but it was built in 1798. It was inspired by the then recent French incursion into Egypt. Another Grand Boulevard icon is Le Grand Rex, an Art Deco masterpiece that happens to be the largest cinema in Europe. It is also worth taking a look at two historic archways into the city, the Porte Saint-Martin and Porte Saint-Denis, which were built during Louis XIV's reign. Before delving into the Louvre and Tuileries, we'll cover some worthwhile sites surrounding the palace and just north of it. The Palais Royal is a magnificent structure with one of the nicest gardens in the city. I would often eat a croissant in here. The historic palace has a turbulent history which I could not even begin to attempt to cover here, but it is a sublime place to explore and relax. The Bibliothèque Nationale Richelieu is a grand historic library. The Oval Reading Room is open to the public. Also, when in the area, stop by and admire the artwork at Saint-Roch. There are two important royal squares in the area, the Place des Victoires featuring a sculpture of Louis XIV, and the even more exuberant Place Vendôme, where the famed Ritz Hotel is located. Its centerpiece is Napoleon's triumphal column, which was based on the Emperor Trajan's column in Rome. Directly across from the Louvre Palace facade is the Church of St-Germain-des-Prés, which has a bit of a dark past as it played a significant role in the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of Huguenots. Just behind it is the wonderful Art Nouveau department store called La Samaritaine, which was recently restored and reopened to its original grandeur. The north side of the Louvre and the Jardin de Tuileries is lined by the Rue de Rivoli, along which the shops are lined by a uniform arcade. This was a project under Napoleon and served as the primary inspiration for Baron Haussmann's standardization of the city's architecture a few decades later. There's also a gilded statue of Joan of Arc. Where to begin with the Musée du Louvre? The largest museum in the world is located inside a sprawling historic palace complex, juxtaposed by more modern additions such as Impey's glass pyramids, and an underground mall attached to the museum called the Carrousel du Louvre. The Louvre displays hundreds of thousands of historic art pieces, including some of the most revered treasures in history, like the Winged Victory of Samothrace. The Louvre's most famous work is Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. Unless you get there right at opening, there is guaranteed to be a queue to get up closer to her, and it's just generally chaotic. Honestly, the wedding at Cana across from the Mona Lisa is the more interesting piece in the room. There are seemingly endless galleries of the museum dedicated to French artwork. Here you can admire great masterpieces by Jacques-Louis David and Eugène Delacroix. I spent 3 full open and closed days going through the Louvre at a brisk pace, and I most certainly did not get to see every section. Depending on your level of interest, you may want to spend a lot of time here. Just make sure you plan ahead for what you want to see the most and which wings of those pieces are located. It really cannot be overstated how massive this museum is. There is a separate museum in the northwestern wing of the Louvre called the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, which is minuscule compared to the rest of the Louvre, but by normal standards it is a huge museum in its own right with over 100 rooms. It features decorative and ornamental arts, especially furnishings and whatnot. Definitely interesting if you enjoy that sort of thing. The historical axis of Paris starts at the Louvre with the Arc de Triomphe du Carrousel, but when I was there the Triumphal Arch was covered under scaffolding. The historical axis is an imaginary line through Paris history, leading from this point at the Louvre down the Champs-Élysées to the Arc de Triomphe, which you can see several kilometers away. Then even farther down the axis ends at the more modern Grand Arch at La Défense, so it's a journey through time. All of this behind the Louvre is the Jardin des Tuileries, the expansive former garden of the Tuileries Palace, which used to be at the end of the Louvre. It was an important royal palace that was sadly burned to a crisp during the Commune. The Jardin des Tuileries is bustling, and there are many sculptures by big-name artists. The highlight of the Jardin des Tuileries is the Musée de l'Orangerie, the showcase of Claude Monet's Nymphaea water lilies, as well as a fantastic collection of early modern artwork. The Orangerie is a must-see. The Jardin des Tuileries leads into the Place de la Concorde, a colossal square which was known for a time as the Place de la Révolution. This was where thousands of people were beheaded by the guillotine during the Revolution, including King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. There is now a 3,000-year-old obelisk from Luxor, Egypt in the center of the square. The Hôtel de la Marine stands on the place. Until recently, this beautiful 18th century edifice was the Ministry of the French Navy, but in 2021 it opened as a museum, where visitors can explore the ornate apartments of the King's Intendant of Royal Properties. The building is also now home to the Altani collection of rare art. I was really impressed with the restoration and presentation here. It is a phenomenal new attraction. Directly behind the Place de la Concorde is La Madeleine, a unique neoclassical church that is not named after the French pastry. Napoleon had this built as a temple to his Grande Armée, but it instead became a church dedicated to Mary Magdalene. From the Place de la Concorde we will start down the famous tree-lined Champs-Élysées, the wide avenue which leads to the Arc de Triomphe. But before we get there, we'll check out some World's Fair history with the Grand and Petit Palais, which were built for the 1900 Exposition Universelle. The Grand Palais exhibits a masterful use of iron, steel, and glass. It is generally used as an exposition space. However, it was closed and under a significant renovation the entire time I was in Paris, as it will play a significant role in the 2024 Olympics festivities. Opposite is the Petit Palais, an elaborate Beaux-Arts structure. The Palais is now an art museum, displaying lots of great historic French artwork, especially from the 18th and 19th centuries. It's definitely worth stopping in, plus it is free like most city-owned museums. Another architectural gem from the 1900 Exposition Universelle spans the Seine. The Pont Alexandre III connects the palaces with the Invalides. The ornamental details on this bridge are fantastic. There is a great statue of Charles de Gaulle on the Champs-Élysées, the avenue that he victoriously marched along after the liberation of Paris. Nearby there is a statue of Winston Churchill. And behind the Petit Palais, there is a new installation by Jeff Koons. It is a memorial to the victims of the November 2015 Paris terrorist attack. 2 kilometers down the Champs-Élysées is the centerpiece, the Arc de Triomphe. The colossal triumphal archway is based on much smaller Roman triumphal arches, and it was originally built to celebrate Napoleon's military victories, though Napoleon himself never got to enjoy it. The arch is adorned by many sculptures and friezes evoking late 18th and early 19th century French military scenes. Underneath the arch is the eternal flame at the tomb of the unknown soldier from the Great War. Visitors can climb up to the top of the Arc de Triomphe for some fantastic views over the city. Now we are going to go back across the city to start on the Rive Gauche, the left bank of the Seine, and there is perhaps no better place to start than the storied streets of the Latin Quarter just across from the Île-de-la-Cité. This area has been settled since the Roman period, so it is one of the oldest neighborhoods of Paris. The area is historically significant for many reasons, one of them being the traditional educational center, thanks to the Sorbonne University, which is located in the Latin Quarter. One of the most interesting sights to see is the Musée National du Moyen Âge, Paris's Museum of the Middle Ages, which features the ruins of Gallo-Roman baths and galleries full of fantastic medieval artwork in a medieval mansion, including the Lady with the Unicorn tapestries. One can discover some really old vestiges around the Latin Quarter, like this rare surviving remnant of the 12th century wall of Philippe Auguste. Many historic churches grace the Latin Quarter, such as the flamboyant Gothic Saint-Séverin, and the magnificent Saint-Étienne-du-Mont, which is home to the shrine of the patron saint of Paris, Saint Geneviève. The Pantheon dominates the Latin Quarter. The architectural marvel with its towering dome was built in the late 18th century as a church to Saint Geneviève, but it became permanently secularized as a French state monument in the 19th century. The Pantheon is characterized by a colossal iron-framed dome. It is now a state mausoleum for great French men and women. Many significant individuals are entombed in the crypt, including Voltaire, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Victor Hugo, Émile Zola, and more recently Josephine Baker was interred here. Marie Curie is enshrined in the Pantheon, and just a couple blocks away you can visit her preserved laboratory at the Musée Curie. At the Université Paris Descartes, there is the Musée d'Histoire de la Médecine, which displays Europe's oldest medical collection. Another interesting museum is the Musée de la Préfecture de Police, the police museum which is home to an authentically used guillotine blade. Paris does have a rather intriguing history of crime, so it's a neat free museum, but it has very limited hours and you have to be escorted there. You can even scope out some street art by Salvador Dali in the Latin Quarter. Shakespeare and Company is in the Latin Quarter. I will admit that I do not care much for the touristy English language bookstore because it is a phony. The real Shakespeare and Company that was operated by Sylvia Beach and frequented by the likes of Ernest Hemingway, James Joyce, and others was located nearby at 12 Rue de l'Odéon. While there are many great boulangeries anywhere you go in Paris, some award winners are located around the Latin Quarter. My personal go-to spot is a chain with 4 locations called Bohémie. There is one at the Place Saint-Michel here in the Latin Quarter. One of the most underrated places in Paris is the Jardin des Plantes, an expansive park and botanical garden that was established in 1635. And by the 19th century it was home to many of the world's great natural science institutions, particularly the Musée National d'Histoire Naturelle. There are 2 separate massive museums in the complex, which are both super old school natural history museums. The Gallery of Paleontology and Comparative Anatomy is staggeringly packed wall to wall with skeletons and fossils of any kind imaginable. The Grande Galerie de l'Evolution is housed in a beautiful chamber featuring taxidermy animals from across the globe. There is also a room of endangered and extinct animals there, which is quite moving. You can see various real specimens of animals that no longer exist. And there's a lot of them. I had never felt sad in a natural history museum before. The Jardin des Plantes is also home to La Menagerie, the second oldest zoo in the world, which opened in 1794. Where you can see a plethora of living animals. It is small, but I quite enjoyed it. Another spot to see Roman Paris is the Arène de Lutèce, the 3rd century Roman arena of Lutetia, where gladiatorial fights were held at one time. The Paris Mosque is situated near the Jardin des Plantes, and not too far from that is the Institut du Monde Arabe, an Arab cultural center and museum located inside a fantastic building decked out with these unique light screens. Perhaps the most classic Parisian park is the Jardin de Luxembourg, with its beautiful gardens surrounding the Palais de Luxembourg. The palace was built for Marie de Medici in the style of the Pitti Palace of Florence. It is now the location of the French Senate. These gardens are definitely one of my favorite spots in the city. The Fontaine de Medici from the 17th century is great, and there are many other sculptures worth seeing. The historic Musée du Luxembourg at the palace was the first public art gallery in France. It is now a venue for temporary exhibitions. I have seen a display on the Dresden Cabinet of Art Curiosities and an Impressionism exhibit based on the Monet family here. So check out what's on display at the Luxembourg. A rather unique church stands nearby. Saint-Sulpice was featured in the Da Vinci Code because of its gnomon, an 18th century sundial that was built straight through the middle of the church. It was used to determine the traditional date of Easter. St-Germain-des-Prés is lined with iconic cafes that have long been a center of Parisian intellectual life, especially in the past 100 years. Cafes such as Le Deux Magots, the Café de Flore, and the Brasserie Lippe were frequented by the likes of Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, Man Ray, and many others. These 3 classic cafes surround the oldest surviving church in Paris, St-Germain-des-Prés, which was originally built in the 6th century. The current edifice is from the 12th century, so it is quite old. Below one of the oldest belfries in France, you can see a bust of the poet Apollinaire by Pablo Picasso. If you are interested in exploring sites related to the Lost Generation in Paris, this is where you'll want to be, as St-Germain-des-Prés and the surrounding neighborhoods were the stomping grounds of Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and many other expatriates who were living here 100 years ago. Gertrude Stein's famed salon was up there. One of the first cafes in Paris was Le Procope, which was patronized by Voltaire, Napoleon, and Benjamin Franklin. The Treaty of Paris ending the American Revolution was also signed in this neighborhood. Oscar Wilde died in a hotel around here, as did Voltaire. One good museum in St-Germain-des-Prés is the Musée Eugène Delacroix, where you can see many of the great Romantic artist's works inside his former home and studio. Back on the River Seine across from the Louvre stands the Institut de France, home to the Académie Française, which dictates and manages the French language. This is the point where the notorious Lovelock Bridge spans the Seine. Locks are no longer allowed on the Pont des Arts because the added weight almost caused the bridge to collapse. Well, at least you're not supposed to. Located inside the former Gare d'Orsay, a railroad station built for the 1900 Exposition Universelle, the Musée d'Orsay displays the most significant collection of Impressionist and Post-Impressionist artwork in the world. It is a fantastic setting for countless iconic works by Manet, Monet, Renoir, Cézanne, Van Gogh, and many others. When people ask me what my favorite museum in Paris is, I will generally reply with the Musée d'Orsay. It is the best. Right across from the Musée d'Orsay, there is a lesser-known museum about the Légion d'honneur, the highest award that can be bestowed by the nation of France. It is really interesting, plus it's located in a grand old mansion that Thomas Jefferson really liked. There's also a statue of him outside along the Seine. Before continuing down the Seine towards the Eiffel Tower, let's check out Montparnasse, which was the bohemian center of Parisian society in the early 20th century. There are many historic cafes in Montparnasse that have a famed clientele such as Le Dôme and La Closerie des Lilas, which was where Ernest Hemingway wrote much of The Sun Also Rises. There are several small art museums in Montparnasse like the Musée Zadkine, located in the former home of the Cubist sculptor Ossip Zadkine. The Musée Antoine Bourdelle is quite impressive, featuring nearly 1,000 of the prolific sculptor's works at his former house, studio, and garden. Now Montparnasse does have a bit of an eyesore in my opinion with the Tour Montparnasse, a large standalone skyscraper in the city. There is an observation deck at the top, but I ran out of time to do that. Another really interesting spot is the Montparnasse Cemetery. Many famous people are entombed here, from Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi, the guy who designed the Statue of Liberty, to Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir. Even the former Mexican president and dictator Porfirio Diaz is here. Montparnasse is where the entrance to the catacombs is located. It is a one-of-a-kind experience to meander through the tunnels under the city lined with the bones of millions of people. The catacombs are fascinating, so if you can stomach it, it is absolutely worthwhile. Across the street from the catacombs entrance there is a relatively new museum, which tells the story of the World War II French resistance, the 1944 liberation of Paris, and resistance leaders like General Leclerc and Jean Moulin. Also consider stopping by the first department store in the world at Le Bon Marché, which opened in 1852. Among some lesser known sites is Notre Dame de Travail, a church with exposed steel framework intended to honor the workers who built the Exposition Universelle. Another overlooked church in the area is Sainte Clotilde, a neo-Gothic masterpiece from the 19th century. Back on the banks of the Seine opposite the Place de la Concorde stands the Palais Bourbon, now home to the Assemblée Nationale. Next, we will explore one of the most fascinating and popular areas of Paris around the Invalides and the Eiffel Tower. At this end of the Pont Alexandre III stands the imposing Hôtel des Invalides, a monument to French military heritage. The Hôtel des Invalides was originally built in the 1670s as a home for disabled and homeless veterans by King Louis XIV, who also had a big church with a gold dome to glorify himself built on the back side. Of course, the magnificent domed church is a highlight. The remains of Napoleon Bonaparte are enshrined under the rotunda in a colossal sarcophagus. Other dethroned members of Napoleon's family are also entombed here, as well as military leaders like Marshal Foch of the Great War. Today, the Invalides is home to several different museums, and if you're a military history buff, you could end up spending quite a lot of time here. The Musée de l'Armée is one of the largest and most comprehensive military history museums anywhere, with an impressive armory collection, and relics related to General Napoleon Bonaparte like his deathbed from the island of St. Helena, and his stuffed horse. The World Wars exhibits were sadly closed when I was there, but they have since reopened after a fresh renovation. On the top level of one of the former barracks is the Musée des Plans Reliefs, which displays some awesome old detailed models of French fortifications, many designed by the important military architect Vauban, who is entombed at the Invalides. There is also a Musée de l'Ordre de la Libération, a separate museum about France in World War II, and the Namesake Award, which was created during the war for French civilians and others who contributed to the overall victory. Right next to the Invalides is another one of my favorites, the Musée Rodin. The innovative sculptor Auguste Rodin worked in this wonderful old mansion, and after his death it was converted into a large museum featuring his works as well as Rodin's personal art collection. The gardens feature many of his most remarkable sculptures like the Thinker, and the Gates of Hell, which is just awesome. A little ways west towards the Eiffel Tower there's the École Militaire, the historic military academy of France, which is generally not open to the public. It is near the UNESCO headquarters, which does occasionally give public tours. One of the best examples of Art Nouveau architecture in the city can be seen between the Invalides and the Eiffel Tower, at number 29 Avenue Rapp. Back along the Seine, there is a relatively new museum experience underneath this little structure. Visitors can now descend into the sewers of Paris at the Musée des Égouts, to learn about the impressive Haussmann-era sewer system and actually walk through a sewer, though it does smell repugnant. Another excellent museum to visit near the Tour Eiffel is the Musée du Quai Branly, a modern ethnographic museum where visitors can take a journey through time and see some great art and artifacts from Oceania, Africa, and the Americas. We have finally made it to the Eiffel Tower, the quintessential landmark of the city that was built for the 1889 Exposition Universelle, where it was largely despised. However, this masterwork of engineering has become a tourism staple. It is always crowded, and tickets, especially to the top at 905 feet or 276 meters, can be difficult to procure. The Eiffel Tower is certainly worth visiting. The views from every level are great, and there are numerous options on how to explore. Definitely plan in advance if you can. You can take the elevators or walk up to the first and second levels, which I would recommend if possible so you can further appreciate the structure. The top level is pretty cool if you can get up there. Plus you can peek into the secret apartment of the tower's engineer, Gustave Eiffel, in which a wax likeness of Eiffel is hanging out with Thomas Edison. The Eiffel Tower is one of those places you have to see, and it does have a fascinating history. Also, the sparkly blue light show that happens on the hour at night is fun to watch. Now let's explore the area directly across the Seine from the Eiffel Tower, which is known as Trocadero or Chaillot. The largest concentration of museums in Paris is actually here around Chaillot, but most of them fly under the average tourist radar. The Palais de Chaillot stands across from the Eiffel Tower. It replaced the Palais de Trocadero, which was here when the Eiffel Tower was built. This more modern palace was built for the 1937 World's Fair, and is now home to 3 museums as well as an aquarium. Now I did not end up visiting the aquarium because it is really expensive and poorly received online, and the Musée de la Marine, a maritime museum, was closed. But the other 2 museums were open and fantastic. The Cité de l'Architecture et du Patrimoine in the east wing of the palace is epic, with its gallery of moulages, which are models of architectural details from the great French cathedrals, as well as a Le Corbusier designed apartment. There are also frequent special expositions inside the palace. I saw a great Art Deco display which was appropriate for the building. The Musée de l'Homme in the west wing is an old anthropological museum with fascinating artifacts. When I was there, they even had a prehistoric art display and tied it into Picasso. One of the world's best Asian art collections is located nearby at the Musée Guimet, which houses some impressive sculptures from Angkor Wat in Cambodia. The Fashion Museum of Paris is known as the Musée Galliera. I visited to see a fantastic exhibition about Frida Kahlo. And across from that is the Palais de Tokyo, another surviving pavilion from the 1937 World's Fair along the Seine. One wing of the palace is home to the Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris, the city's modern art collection, which is overshadowed by the Centre Pompidou, but it's Paris, so it's an unsurprisingly awesome collection. The highlight being Raoul Dufy's La Fée Électricité mural from the World's Fair. This modern art museum is free to visit. One of the many Franco-American references in the area is the Flame of Liberty, a full-size recreation of Lady Liberty's torch which stands above the Alma Tunnel, where Princess Diana's car fatally crashed. Right by the Palais de Chaillot in the shadow of the Eiffel Tower, there is a little-known cemetery, where Edouard Manet and Claude Debussy are buried. To the west of Chaillot, there are some famous houses to visit, like the apartment of Georges Clemenceau, who was Prime Minister of France during part of the Great War, as well as the little house of renowned author Honoré de Balzac. And while you're all the way out here, check out the mini Statue of Liberty on an island in the middle of the Seine. Also consider taking a boat ride on the Seine. I would recommend the Bateau Mouche for a relaxing scenic cruise through the heart of Paris. Now we will start heading up towards the hill of Montmartre, which is a good ways north of the Seine and will generally require a good deal of walking uphill and a lot of stairs, even if you take the metro. There are a couple of great museums near Montmartre, one being the Musée Gustave Moreau, which displays an intriguing collection of the simplest artist's works inside his former home and studio. Another one is the Musée de la Vie Romantique, the Museum of Romantic Life in Paris inside the former home of romantic artist Ari Scheffer. Here you can see many romantic art pieces, as well as the relics of author George Sand. Also stop into the neoclassical Notre Dame de Lorette. Now Montmartre is a particularly captivating area of the city, long considered sacred because it is believed to be the site of the martyrdom of Saint Denis, a fellow patron saint of the city along with Saint Genevieve. In the late 19th and into the early 20th century, it became the bohemian center of the city with its bars, cabarets, and bordellos. So many artists, including a lot of the Impressionists, ended up living in this village-like setting. At least that's more so what it used to be like before being overrun by tourists. Sacré-Cœur dominates the hill of Montmartre. It is a seemingly out-of-place Romano-Byzantine basilica that was completed just after the Great War. The interior is beautiful, but sadly they do not allow photography inside. It is worth seeing the views from the roofline of the basilica. There is also a much older church nearby. In fact, one of the oldest in Paris, known as Saint-Pierre de Montmartre. It was built in the 12th century. While this is a very touristic district today, there are places to explore the authentic history of Montmartre, such as at the Musée de Montmartre. It is located inside some old homes that have had numerous famous inhabitants, including Pierre-Auguste Renoir and Maurice Utrillo, whose studio is preserved. If you want to learn more about the area, this is definitely the place to visit. There are many classic spots to visit around Montmartre, including Au Lapin Agile, a cabaret where Apollinaire used to hang out. There's also the Moulin de la Galette with its windmill. This formerly working class dance hall was famously depicted by Renoir. The iconic Moulin Rouge is in Montmartre. This classic cabaret is a reconstruction of the original. I did have a chance to see the Moulin Rouge show and it's great, though a bit pricey. As mentioned, many famous artists lived here at Montmartre. I located the former apartments and homes of Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, Vincent van Gogh, Pablo Picasso at the Bateau Lavoir, and you can also see the famed singer Dalida's house. One location that really impressed me was the Halles Saint-Pierre, an old market hall which is now a museum of outsider and naive art, which means art created by self-taught artists. There is also a Salvador Dali gallery nearby with over 300 works by the surrealist who did at one point live in Montmartre. There are some intriguing art installations along the meandering streets of Montmartre, such as the ever-popular Murder Je t'aime. Montmartre also has a really interesting cemetery where many of the area's colorful characters are laid to rest, including the dancer La Goulou, Edgar Degas, and Jacques Offenbach, who wrote the Can-Can. So, that covers the primary central tourism areas of Paris. However, there is much more to explore in the surrounding outskirts of the city, both inside and outside the Boulevard Périphérique, the ring road around Paris. In the northwest areas of the city near the Arc de Triomphe and the Opera Quarter, the Parc Monceau is a charming garden and park with some architectural follies in the spirit of the English garden. There are several museums in the lavish mansions near this park, such as the Musée Nissim de Commando, displaying many rare 18th century furnishings and other objets d'art inside a grand mansion. The Musée Cernouchi displays the Asian antiquities collection of a turn of the 20th century banker. The Musée Jean-Jacques Henner is dedicated to the works of the 19th century artist. This one's definitely not the best. I love the Musée Jacques-Marc André on the Boulevard Haussmann. It is located inside a magnificent old mansion, and it features the works of many old masters and countless antiques. They also regularly put on some great special exhibitions. Also, the Chapelle Expiatoire in the 8th arrondissement is a memorial on the site where Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were buried after they got their heads chopped off. A couple decades after they were killed, their remains were moved north of the city to Saint-Denis to be interred at the Basilique Saint-Denis. This magnificent Gothic basilica is the traditional burial site for the rulers of France. Now most of them are jumbled in this mass tomb. The surviving funerary monuments and tremendous history of the site is absolutely worth a trip north of Paris on Metro Line 13, even though that probably is the worst metro line. The outlying village of Auvers-sur-Oise is wonderful, as this was where Vincent van Gogh spent his final months and where he died in the summer of 1890, so you can go around and locate many scenes from his iconic final paintings, as well as the graves of Vincent and his brother Theo. Auvers-sur-Oise is about 30 kilometers north of the city. The west side of Paris has some great museums, such as the Villa La Roche, a UNESCO designated house designed by Le Corbusier. The Musée Marmottan Monet is a true gem, featuring the largest collection of works by Claude Monet, as well as great paintings by other Impressionist artists like Bertha Morisot. One of the two green lungs of Paris is known as the Bois de Boulogne, which is a massive park. It even has its own historic amusement park. A relatively new addition to the Bois de Boulogne is the Fondation Louis Vuitton. Located inside of an excellent Frank Gehry designed structure, there is not a permanent collection on display, but they do put on some first-rate art exhibitions with that Louis Vuitton money. I saw one juxtaposing the latter works of Claude Monet with the abstract expressionist Joan Mitchell, as well as a showcase of the joint projects of Andy Warhol and Jean-Michel Basquiat. Definitely check what's on at the Fondation Louis Vuitton when you visit Paris. The historical axis of Paris ends at a modern metropolis just outside the city limits, known as La Défense, which was launched in the 60s and is still being built today. In 1989, the Grand Arch of La Défense was completed. It is an enormous hollow cube office building. It does have an observation deck at the top, which is cool but expensive. The western suburbs of Paris have some great attractions, like the National Archaeological Museum of France at the Château de St-Germain-des-Prés, and the architect François Mansart's masterpiece Château de Maison Lafitte. The Château de Malmaison, the mansion of Napoleon and Josephine Bonaparte, is a phenomenal place to visit. Josephine is entombed nearby at the Paroisse Saint-Pierre-Saint-Paul de Rouy. Even farther afield in Poissy, you can visit Le Corbusier's masterpiece, the Villa Savoie, which perfectly outlines his 5 points of architecture. Southwest of Paris, there's a museum about 1930s France, the Musée des Années 30, at Boulogne-Billancourt. There is actually a second Rodin museum in Meudon that is not as well known. There you can go inside of Auguste Rodin's home, go through a gallery with authentic plaster models, and visit his grave, which is topped by a thinker. Of course, the Château de Versailles is one of the most historically significant palaces in world history, if not the most, so it certainly merits a visit. The sprawling scale of this palace is most impressive, and there is some fantastic artwork and architectural details throughout the state apartments of Louis XIV and his successors. Of course, the Grand Hall of Mirrors has an important place in 20th century history with the Treaty of Versailles. Also, the Gallery of Great Battles is a spectacular journey through French military history. I spent 2 full days going through the spectacular palace complex, with its beautiful sprawling gardens and outlying palaces, like the Petit Trianon and the hamlet of Queen Marie Antoinette. While Versailles is superb, do not overlook the Château de Fontainebleau, which is nearly 70 kilometers away from Paris, so it is a lot less crowded than Versailles. This palace is just as artistically and historically remarkable, with sections dating back to Francois I. It did become a primary residence of Emperor Napoleon, and it is where he abdicated in 1814. There's a whole Napoleon museum inside. In the southeast sector of the city, the former wine trading quarter was converted into a modern district called Bercy. The Bibliothèque Nationale de France. The National Library is located inside and under these four modern open book-shaped towers. They have Louis XIV's giant globes inside. The Cinémathèque Française maintains one of the most important film archives in the world within a Frank Gehry designed structure. It is home to the Musée Méliès, a film history museum featuring some rare surviving relics from Georges Méliès' productions which are mind-blowing to see. The crown jewel of Bercy is the Musée des Arts Forains, an eccentric display of historic fairground and amusement park attractions. You do have to go through on a guided tour in French, but it is so much fun. You get to see some antique shows in action and ride antique rides. This Velo carousel is insane. This is definitely one of the most whimsical and enjoyable experiences in Paris. On the east side of Paris, there are some great parks to explore. The Parc des Buttes-Chaumont is spectacular. It was built out of a quarry and dump during the Third Empire. The Parc de la Villette at the northeast corner of the city is a more modern development and has many interesting facilities. This giant old cattle hall is used for exhibitions. I got to see an interesting one about the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses II in there. A primary attraction of the park is the Cité des Sciences et de l'Industrie, a science museum with a submarine. There is also the Cité de la Musique, a music hall and museum which is neat. Adjacent to the Cité, there's the relatively new Philharmonie de Paris. They do put on exhibitions inside sometimes. There was one about Jean-Michel Basquiat and music which was a pleasant surprise. Paris does have a canal system on this side of the city, the most popular being the Canal Saint-Martin. This is the Rotonde de la Villette, one of the few surviving grand toll houses of the former Farmers General Wall that was around the city. Also near the Place de la Nation, you can visit the Picpus Cemetery, a private cemetery which does have a small admission charge, where the Marquis de Lafayette is entombed. As an American, it was a great honor to visit his tomb among the mass graves of victims of the Reign of Terror. The Cimetière de Père-Lachaise is one of the most intriguing cemeteries in the world. I spent a lot of time exploring this historic cemetery and locating the graves of historical figures, like those of Oscar Wilde, Edith Piaf, and Jim Morrison. The Atelier des Lumières is a relatively new immersive art experience with regularly changing shows. I saw ones based on Cézanne and Kandinsky. The Palais de la Porte de Ré is a fascinating Art Deco structure from the Paris Colonial Exposition of 1931. There is a frieze on the facade which depicts the contributions of France's colonies. It is considered a little problematic nowadays. The palace is now home to the Cité Nationale d'Histoire de l'Immigration, an immigration museum which was in the process of being revamped, so I didn't get to see that. But they also have a tropical aquarium in the basement, so that was nice. The rest of the exposition took place at Paris's other green lung, the Bois de Vincennes. It is a large forest park with some hidden gems. The Paris Zoo is here, but I didn't get to that. The Bois was the former hunting ground of the Château de Vincennes, a primary royal palace of France before Versailles. This is a quintessential medieval castle with an overwhelming amount of history. The 14th century donjon tower is awesome. Definitely worth going out of your way to visit. To the east of Paris, the Château de Champs-Élysées is sublime. Also, if you're interested in exploring World War I history, visit the town of Meaux to see the Musée de la Grande Guerre. It is the largest World War I museum in France. We will conclude this whirlwind around Paris and the Île-de-France with France's cultural Chernobyl, Disneyland Paris. Parc Disneyland is overall phenomenal. The 1992 Castle Park is beautiful and so incredibly well themed. There are 5 distinct themed lands: Main Street USA, Frontierland, Adventureland, Fantasyland, and Discoveryland. Frontierland is definitely my favorite, and it is widely considered to be one of the best immersive lands at any Disney theme park around the world. Some of the attractions in this park are truly masterpieces, such as the Phantom Manor, which is a unique twist on the classic Haunted Mansion. The Paris version of the Pirates of the Caribbean dark ride is astounding. Big Thunder Mountain Railroad is also epic. One of the best aspects of Disneyland Paris are the immersive walkthrough attractions, such as the Discovery and Liberty arcades along Main Street USA, as well as the Cabane des Robinsons and Adventure Île in Adventureland. There is some remarkable artistry and features you won't find at any other Disney park. There is even a freaking animatronic dragon under the chateau. The sister park, Walt Disney Studios Park, is frankly not the best, but there are some great attractions like the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror. This park is in the midst of a major reimagining. In fact, it is being renamed as Disney Adventure World. Plus, they are expanding the park with new attractions and lands in the near future. The most recent being the Avengers Campus in 2022. Also, the Mickey et le Magicien show is excellent. They even have several different resorts themed after different regions of the United States. In recent times, Disneyland Paris has been an innovator in drone show technology, and they just keep expanding on that. Along with new drone shows which do not tend to stay for long, there are the usual parades in the Castle Park, and the Grand Fireworks Show to close out the evening. So say what you will about Disneyland Paris, I absolutely love it and have to recommend going even if you're not a Disney fan. The Castle Park is a bona fide masterpiece. Alors, c'est Paris pour vous. So that's Paris for you. I hope you learned about some new potential places to visit in Paris. It was a privilege and an honor to have been able to explore this legendary city in this level of depth. And I do intend to produce full-length videos on this channel on every attraction featured here and more. So if you're interested, stay tuned by subscribing to Hoosier Tours. Also consider clicking the like button and sharing this slightly over-the-top guide. I would really appreciate it. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments section. I would be happy to offer some more suggestions. I also have a Patreon page in case you would like to further support the production of these videos, and I do want to give a shout out and big thanks to those who have already been directly supporting the channel on Patreon. I have a plethora of travel videos featuring cities, attractions, natural wonders, theme parks, and so much more around Europe and the United States, so consider taking a look at my other content as well. Thanks for watching!